Welcome, everyone. And we would like to start on time. Welcome to A Tale of Two Slaveries. And we have our erudite septuagenarian historian, Professor Akosua
We could
Perbi,
move.
to
Okay.
unravel this
All right,
intertwining.
then I'll speak to
A lot
after.
of people do not
Yeah. Okay. Are you
realize
going to join that Zoom
that
thing? I'm trying to join that Zoom
there
thing
were
at
two
12:30. If you're not
slaveries.
putting the link.
Of course,
Link.
I mean, you can even say more if you
A
add
Tale
the
of Two Slaveries. Yeah, it's on the. I put a link on there.
slave trade. So
Yeah.
thanks for your interest in this.
No, it's just now. Half
We'll
past.
begin right
It
now
might be
with some
interesting.
music
You just
from
register quickly now. I just did it now.
and
Okay.
so
All right. Okay. Bye.
relax, enjoy that, and after that, I'll introduce the person who's going to be our moderator, our interviewer, and we will get going. So enjoy Osibisa in the meantime. Welcome home.
You've been gone, it's an empty home. Come on back where you really belong. You are always welcome home, welcome home. You've been kept down for much too long. Stand up, please, and say I am free. Don't forget you are welcome home, welcome home. Come with me on this happy trip back to the promised land. All will be happy.
You can't even hear you.
Come with me on this happy
Somebody give me a thumbs up if
back
you can hear
to
me.
the promised land. All will be happy again. You've been gone, it's an empty home. Come on back where you really belong. You are always welcome home, welcome home. Come with me on this happy trip back to the promised land. All will be happy
So welcome. So excited to see all of you. Thank you. Thank you for joining us.
All will be happy
Frederick, David, Jojo, welcome.
welcome
So welcome home. Indeed, the subject we are about to look at is not the easiest of subjects. And so I thought a nice soothing song like that would sound classic.
No, you play that order.
Housekeeping things. If you will kindly
You plays an order, and they delivered it on Saturday. Instead, it was ready and they delivered on Saturday.
But when you
Now, yes.
your mic, if you can, that will be awesome.
No,
All right. There'll be time to ask questions,
not all.
and then you will be invited to unmute on your mic. Wonderful. Thank you. So today, we are privileged to have an erudite septuagenarian historian. Many of you may have come across Professor Akosua Perbi to unravel the intertwining of indigenous and transatlantic slaveries. And you are welcome for joining us. There are about 70 of us on the line right now, and that is wonderful on a Wednesday afternoon. This is brought to us by Perbi Paradigms, which is an organization, a company that is to media communication that wants to platform good. And Africa to the Rest, which is a book that was published a couple of years ago, but really it's not about a book, it's a movement. As you know, a lot of African history is not written. And until the lion learns to write, every tale of the hunt will glorify the hunter. You know that. And also brought to us by Pan-African International Students. You can go to panafricanstudents.org because we really want to see a flourishing of African international students diaspora. Our interviewer today actually happens to be an international student, and I'll review him shortly. And of course, by sub-Saharan publishers, who are the ones who originally published Professor Perbi's historic book, classic, A History of Indigenous Slavery in Ghana from the 15th to the 19th centuries. If the CEO of Sub-Saharan is around, we'll allow her a few words later on. But welcome. I'm sure we're going to get quite a treat. And so my name is Yao Perbi. I happen to be the host. As Perbi Paradigms, we would love to platform good. We'll love to tell the right kinds of stories that shape us to become, all that God made us to be, our full potential. And so we thought this is Ghana, for a number of years now, because Ghana's independence is on 6th March, a number of us have, kind of leveraged that to make the whole month of March a month of celebration of our history, telling our stories, and people even travel across the country on heritage trips and things like that. And so we were thinking about it. I posted short video of my mom being interviewed a number of years ago about why, one Ashanti king said, why has slavery stopped? And that piqued a lot of interest on social media. And so I said, hey, right, my mom is retired. She likes things down and low, but why don't we pull her back out of hibernation and do this? That's how come we're doing this. And one of the people that showed a lot of interest was the celebrated journalist Manasseh Azure, who actually grabbed a copy of the book and started reading, and has been very intrigued. Actually had a conversation with Professor Perbi, I believe. And so, ladies and gentlemen, I'm happy to announce that Manasseh is in the house. He's joining us. It's early in the morning for him in the US. He's now an international student, and he's a celebrated journalist. You all know him, particularly investigative journalist, and do the interview of Professor Perbi coming up in a minute or so. So you're welcome if you just joined us. We're about to be treated to a wonderful conversation. We'll do this for maybe about 40 minutes or so, depending on how it goes, and then we'll allow people to share their own stories. It may be harrowing stories, it may be stories of redemption, but also questions that you may have. I particularly am concerned, what does all of this mean for Ghana today and Africa today and going forward? So welcome. I will, at this time, ask Manasseh to take over from me. We don't have, this is not, by the way, this is not at the instance of Professor Perbi. This is not to, introduce her and sell her book. This is at my instance and the prodding of various of my friends on social media. That's important. Another thing I need to say before I bring Manasseh on is that Professor Perbi is in her mid-70s now. She's not as strong and as sharp as she used. In fact, she's actually suffered near blindness in one eye. So we will be gentle in our discourse, and be kind, and as she blesses us with 40 years and 40 years plus of career in this area. All right, so welcome again. Feel at home, and over to you, Manasseh.
Thank you very much, Dr. Perbi, for this very great opportunity to interact with a great intellectual. A month ago, I had to present a paper as part of a course I'm doing. I'm currently studying creative writing at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, and I took a course that is centered on the abolitionist era here in the US, the Reconstruction, the Civil War, writings within the period. We are reading Booker T. Washington and Charles Chestnut and Du Bois and others. And I got interested in how those slaves got here in the first place. There's a debate here in the US, who freed the slaves? So my paper this semester is who sold the slaves? And I couldn't think of any other material than the Professor Akosua Perbi's book, which I bought, left in Ghana, but had to buy a copy on Amazon for my project, and I'm very, very well enjoying it. And the biggest revelation I've had, I saw the foreword written by Emeritus Professor J.H. Kwabena Nketia, an International Center for African Music and Dance at the University of Ghana. And I'm getting to know that Professor Akosua Perbi is the daughter of Professor Kwabena Nketia. And I want to start by asking Professor Perbi how it feels. We know if you are the son of Abedi Pele, there's so much weight on you. How did you feel growing up and telling people this was your father?
Hello, Manasseh. Thank you for inviting me. Oh, I feel very proud anytime somebody mentions my father's name, because he's done a lot of work, a lot of music, a lot of poetry, and encouraged people who he taught to move on in the academic world. So I'm happy to talk with you, and we'll move on.
Thank you very much. Someone will say historians focus on so many things. Why did you decide that for you, your area of specialty is slavery? I read your book and I was amazed at the amount of research that went into this book across countries, across continents. And you did a lot of research and field visits in Ghana. And I don't think there is a richer book on this subject than what I have now. What motivated you to go into slavery?
Thank you very much. It just happened that some of the professors who taught me, and slavery was part of the syllabus, it set me thinking. They were encouraging me that we could do some more research. And then I realized that we had indigenous slavery as well. We had all been thinking of the Atlantic one outside Ghana. And then I realized that with encouragement by my professors, we could talk about indigenous slavery, that there was also slavery within Africa, within Ghana. So it became my topic of discussion and writing.
Someone growing up in Ghana and being in school, when I heard about slavery, all that I knew about was some white men came here took our people captive, went and sold them. I'm learning about indigenous slavery. Even before we come to what the white man did or what we blacks did or didn't do, can you enlighten us a bit on the difference between indigenous slavery and transatlantic slavery?
Indigenous slavery, as the word shows, means that it was within the structure of Ghana itself. It wasn't that it was an outside issue. So within our own country, there was this idea of people having, selling slaves. And it was mainly through a lot of war that was fought. There were a lot of wars, and then there were captives. So what do you do with the captives? Then it was like sell them. And then markets popped up, various markets within Ghana were selling slaves. They were getting the slaves from other people who had battles fought. So that is how it all started. And people started moving to Salaga and other markets to buy slaves.
And this happened before the advent of or the arrival of the white men and the white slave traders, right?
It happened, the time they came in, What I researched on was from the 15th to the 19th century. And the Europeans were also started coming in 15th century, but there were a lot of wars within Ghana in terms of kingdom building and state building. So what do? You need the slaves to do a lot of work in the palaces, in the homes, and other things. So that is why I was encouraged by my professors that why don't we look at indigenous, what has happened within Ghana itself.
And I suppose you may have encountered some challenges going into this, because I know reading the book, there are some very uncomfortable truths and realities in there. What were some of the challenges you encountered, even amongst your academic peers?
What I found interesting was that I went to a lot of chiefs' palaces, kings' palaces, asking questions, and the chiefs giving me some information, as well as those who work in the palaces. And one of the things that came out was that it was difficult for them to quickly say, this person is a slave, this person is a slave. There was the issue of bringing them into the family and making them play various parts in the work. So what I thought of was that indigenous slavery was not as bad and difficult as the transatlantic, because going out across the ocean, the treatment was very different from what happened within Ghana and within parts of Africa.
Thank you very much. But did these chiefs and traditional areas you visited, did they readily accept that their forebears actually engaged in slavery and slave trade, or some resisted the obvious truth?
There wasn't rejection, but what happened was that once there were battles, raidings and battles to be fought, there were also prisoners of war. So it came in as part of the battles that were going on in the country. So what do you do with those you've caught, as it were, or with the victory that you've had over the battles? And so the kings or the chiefs would send the slaves to the palaces and decide what role they should play. Those who would take care of the kitchen, those who would take care of washing, those who take care of cleaning, those who take care of, spreading the bed of the chiefs and their children, And then, of course, the greatest one were those who were cooking to make the chiefs and the children happy.
Thank you
And
very
farming.
much.
There was also the farming aspect, that people went to the farm to grow various crops and then pluck them at the proper time.
Reading your book, they are very enlightening moments, and I think it starts even from the forward by Professor Nketia. And then what struck me was how slavery, indigenous slavery, had its negative side, but it also led to some level of integration that today ethnic groups may not even remember. And there is a proverb, and he cites a number of proverbs and sayings that lend credence to this. And one of them says, Asante kuro benso na onana niso. Asante kuro benso. Sorry, Asante kuro ben na onana niso. Meaning, in which Asante town does one not find people from other lands? And this talks about the integration within that period. And I found this very interesting. I don't know what struck you the most when you went around to learn about these stories, integration, and how people from the north and south almost blended to the extent that in some families or royal families, there are slaves who sometimes even claim to or lay claim to the stool.
Yes, I think one of the things I also found out as I did the research was the acceptance of the slaves who had come in and sharing of whatever duty they had to do. And so there was a lot of magnanimity in the way the elders, the chiefs, the kings accepted those who had gone to the slave markets, to take them to the slave markets to be bought. Sometimes also they had so many prisoners of war that they had to decide within the palaces who they were going to pick to do specific aspects of the work in the palaces.
Thank you. Let's now come to the transatlantic slave trade. The white man came and slavery took a different angle. Before we look at how it was even done, can you please tell us the difference between slavery here and then slavery, if I say here in Africa or Ghana, the indigenous slavery and the transatlantic slavery? How was the first the trade and also how slaves were used in both contexts?
I think the indigenous slavery accepted the slaves within their homes, within the chief's palaces, and required that they had certain duties to perform. So there were those who were the cooks, and then there were those who were tending to the farm, there were those who were cleaning, there were those who were taking care of the children, and so on. And it wasn't an era of punishing a slave, as compared with what happened when people crossed the ocean. They were given masters and mistresses who were non-African and were treating them as they wanted. So there were differences in the transatlantic and the indigenous. But my specialty was really in the indigenous. That was how it was like.
Thank you very much. And now the controversial subject of who sold the slaves. I was in the Democratic Republic of Congo last year. Some Harvard students visited and I was part of them. And at the museum, the tour guide gave a timeline of their political history and said they killed Patrice Lumumba. So the journalist in me asked, who killed Patrice Lumumba? And he started to fumble. He said he didn't know. Another one came in and said, well, he was captured and taken to the Katanga area and they killed him. And my question was, who captured him? At the time, DRC had gained independence. So how did the colonial or the white people capture your prime minister? And said, well, it were those who captured him were blacks. And later on, I read further and realized there was a man called Chombe who Malcolm X described as the West African ever to be born. And this was the man who, together with Mobutu, did this to Lumumba. But growing up, we had always read or heard the Belgians killed Lumumba. Our role is always out. And I'm beginning to think that perhaps in slavery, we may be accomplices and not victims after all. I don't see any better person to show the way on this than you. What were the roles of blacks and Africans in the transatlantic slave trade? Who sold the slaves to the white man?
From the Ghana point of view or the African point of view, a lot of the slaves were actually through battles that had been fought and amongst the states and the units in the country. And after every battle, you take prisoners of war. It's like you have conquered them. So when
the states in this area or era was I think the ethnic groups, the Dagomba state, Asante state, and the rest, right?
Yes, at that time.
Thank you.
Yes. So, and it was the chiefs who really, the kings and the chiefs who were going for the war with their captains and their soldiers and so on. And then they would always bring captives of war. And into the palaces, they would decide who to do what and who to send to the wider market within the area of the country. As for that one, what they did in the wider market was not the chiefs and the other workers' problem. It was because various markets had been decided and they wanted captives of war. So that is how it went. And those who went to cut the captives of war would send them straight to the coast of Ghana, because along the coast, they realized that there were also Europeans who had come to the coast and wanted slaves as prisoners. So that is how it happened. So there was internal and external. And my work has really focused on internal within the country. What happened? Definitely in America, I wasn't part of them. So it's within the country and the roles that they played.
Thank you very much for this. So where were the main market centers? And if I understand this trade, maybe from your explanation, it appeared as though maybe if one ethnic group captured and the chiefs captured slaves, sometimes they didn't sell directly to the white man. There were other intermediaries or market centers before they got to the coast. Yes. So where were these centers and who were involved in them? Were they like individual Ghanaians who were selling these people as commodity?
Yes, they were the ones the chiefs and the kings were the ones who went to the battlefield. And then they would decide those they need in the palaces to perform various duties. And those they wouldn't need, they would send them to the slave market. And so there were those who went to the slave market at various places. If you read my book, you will find that I've given a geographical picture of the various spots where the markets were, and then what people were, when they went to buy them, what they used them for. And then the chiefs always had the upper hand because they were always fighting the battles. And then they would decide how many prisoners of war they need. Then they will go to the palaces and think of various duties that palace people do. So who will do what? And where are those who will be taken to the coast to cross the Atlantic?
Some of these kingdoms or states were already rich, mining gold, and had a lot of resources. At the time, were they taking dollars from, let's say, the Americans, and then pounds from the British, or what benefit were they getting from selling these slaves?
They exchanged the slaves with provisions and then various kinds of drinks, especially schnapps, because it was not money per se, but it was in kind. Things that they would bring from Europe, America, to exchange with the prisoners, for the prisoners, that they will use them in that way. So it was a double vision situation.
I read an article about a Nigerian writer who decided to trace her ancestry and then realized that her great-grandfather was actually a slave trader. And in that article, which I think the BBC, the New York Times, and others published, she asked the father whether he regrets the work their great-grandfather did. And then the father's response is, why should I regret and feel sorry? At the time, this was legitimate business. And I'm wondering, going to these palaces and kingdoms where they captured these slaves and sold, what was the mood there? How was the reaction of the descendants of the slave traders?
Well, it's very difficult to, psychologically notice what kind of feelings the people had. But it has happened in the history. And what I know is that with the kings and the chiefs and so on, when they went to battle and they caught the prisoners, they always decided what they needed, who they needed for what work. So they would want some in the kitchen to cook. They would want some to wash clothes. They would want some to watch over the farms. They would want some to make sure that everybody is well cooked, cook food, well fed, and well taken care of. Some of it you have to imagine how the chiefs and the kings behave. But then when they are called prisoners of war, then there's the issue of how do you share them out and what do you do with them? The American story, nobody really came back to say when we went, we were maltreated. But later, for those who were educated and went outside to study, were those who tried to find out quietly who was who and how were they treated. So I personally have done a lot of work with the indigenous one, and I know something a bit about transatlantic. And it's quite common to talk about the two. But then for the sake of my PhD work that I was doing, I was encouraged to look at the indigenous, what was happening within Ghana itself. And then we realized how those who went to the slave markets took the slaves all the way to the palaces, decided who should do what, and then the rest to the coast. And then there were the Europeans who were on the coast in the castles, also exchanging the prisoners who had come in with sometimes even drinks, schnapps, and some cowries and so on. It's a long, long story, and sometimes it's a sad, sad story. But I always say to myself as a historian that I wasn't responsible for what they did, but our forebears did it. And so we need to have a time when we have to ask for forgiveness about some of the things that our forebears did. So it's good to think of our emancipation and to remember it as well.
Thank you. And this brings us to a very important question. You have African leaders, and our former president was very instrumental in that, under the umbrella of the African Union, asking for reparation for slavery from Europe and America and those who engage in this act. And I am asking, do you want the white man to pay you for selling your own people to the white man? And some have very different opinions on this subject. Do you think, from what you know with how slavery was done in Africa, that Europe or America owe Africans reparation for slavery?
It's quite a delicate topic, because either way, those who gained whatever they wanted to do gained it, and then those who didn't were not happy about it, were also not happy about it. It's a really tricky issue, because one of the things I find, and I found in my teaching, is that many of the slaves who went did not come back to really tell the story of how they felt. It had to take a long story of people who had later on been educated to do some research and to find out that this is what happened within the transatlantic. So I find really that the indigenous and the Atlantic were two different issues. They were not the same. All of them were having the ideas and needs in different places and in different times and moods. And one of the things that keeps me wondering is that sometimes you feel like, I wish I was alive 15th century, 16th century, 17th century, and so on, to have seen with my own eyes how the slaves were treated. But then it isn't that. It was those who were enslaving the slaves who could tell the story. It's a delicate story, and all we can do is to forgive those who did not take good care of the slaves who played the various roles.
Yes, at the beginning, Dr. Yao Perbi made reference to a video of an interview you granted many years ago as a young woman, and I found it instructive. The point you made about an Asante king who was surprised to hear how the slaves were treated out there. We have a saying in Ghana that if you shove the old lady, then you shouldn't pretend to care how she falls or on what she falls. But beyond that, I am wondering whether these chiefs didn't see anything wrong, one, with even how the slaves were transported. There was some lack of dignity to it. And then selling your own to someone else, wasn't that even enough to have warned or told these chiefs that what you are doing is very wrong, even if they didn't know, and I suppose it is true that they didn't know exactly the kind of torture and murders that the slaves were subjected to in the Americas. But was the act alone not enough to have alarmed them to say, no, we won't do this for snaps and other?
You see, it's very complicated. And from the way things went or going on, you don't know what somebody is thinking about when he's looking at these slaves and what should be done. And it's like a psychological issue. And so when we look back, it's like sometimes we have to talk about the blame game. You blame them that they brought them to the Americas and they were ill-treated. And then you go to the indigenous kings and they say, no, we treated them very well because we brought them from the battlefield. So we have different ideas and different desires. Everybody is not the same and everybody does not do the same, but it's a muddle of issues. And so we have to just look up and say, oh, what a pity in all these stories that we have. But we pray to the Almighty to have mercy on all of us. There's the issue of reparations. Forgive what has happened. Send some money to make people realize that you have forgiven us for some of the things that you did.
Thank you very much. I want to go through some of the comments. We have Clement Ofeajiman, who says, always, thanks for putting this great discussion together. And we have Michelle Leslie Ann Samuel from the Trinidad and Tobago in the West Indies joining us. Thank you so much, our brother from Trinidad and Tobago. Here in the US, there is something I've come to notice. You meet someone who doesn't know you anywhere, but because you share a skin color, and the African Americans have a unique way of saying the word brother in a very endearing way. So we are siblings. Unfortunately, some people just did this to us. We have Leslie Mills, who says, thanks for this interesting discussion. In my personal interaction with descendants of slaves living in the diaspora, it is common to hear the phrase, your ancestors sold us into slavery. I wonder if it is time for Native Africans to officially acknowledge this truth. I think it may be part of the healing efforts to help in bridging the gap between the Native Africans and our brothers and sisters in the diaspora. In my experience, this admission of participation in slavery seems to be a taboo subject. I may be wrong. We want Americans, we want the British, we Australians, everybody to apologize. Do you think it is time for Africans, Ghanaians, to also apologize to our brothers and sisters who have suffered and continue to suffer the effect of what we did years ago or centuries ago?
You know, this is a tricky subject because sometimes I've heard my students, when we teach this slavery, they say to themselves, I wasn't responsible. It was a great-great-grandfather or a great ancestor who did that. So the blame game becomes questionable because it is something that some people have done. And yet some people are also saying, why did you do that? Because you didn't meet them. You didn't see them. So this is why people are talking about reparations. That maybe, as we all talk about various issues and various stories, let's do something that will cool our heart. Let's forgive and let's share talk about reparations and say, let's forget it and forgive. It's a complicated thing, really. Very complicated.
Yes, I know how complicated this is, and even in America here, when this subject comes up in class about the writers, there are even some Black writers, they say some things that some of us who are Blacks don't agree with. It is very complicated, but I'm wondering, some of the leaders who are shouting, let's get some money back, pay us for this, some of them are descendants of slave traders. And then there's someone asking a question that I want to ask Isaac Nikwe that an explanation that if you should discover that you are a descendant of or from indigenous slaves in Ghana, how should you respond? You're a Ghanaian and then you realize that, okay, maybe you're an Asante or you're an Achim or you are a Gonja or the Gomba, you realize that, oh, you were actually originally from somewhere, but a descendant of indigenous slavery. What should be your response?
This is a complicated question. It's really complicated. It's not something I've really thought about deep in itself. But then the idea of forgiveness is what I think we can also label. That if something has happened and the wrong thing has resulted from that, let's forgive and let's live. So I think the idea of reparations is also good. That can we give something to pacify all that had happened? You know, it's a full, muddled job. Slavery has been a complicated issue, and the remnants of slavery is even more complicated. But the issue of forgiveness can also help. That is what I think.
Thank you very much. But for academics like you, some of us may never have even averted our minds to the other side of the story. Growing up, it was always one thing. I remember the first time I visited the Cape Coast Castle. I think that was the Elmina and Cape Coast Castle, was when I was in the Ghana Institute of Journalism. And I remember what a student said after the tour guide gave us a briefing. He said angrily that when you hear these stories, you feel like lynching the next white man you meet in the streets. And I remember this very well because I wrote an article and I still have a copy of that newspaper. So until we started seeing works like yours, it was as if this is a one-sided story of the victim and then maybe a villain. And I'm anchoring this question on something Richard Ajao has said, that we should always remember, is in the comment chat, that these states, that is the ethnic groups at the time, did not see things from a racial point. It was about their states surviving, and this was through conquest. Therefore, a conquering state selling prisoners of war will not see them as one of their own. They were subjects of an enemy state. Race is a modern concept. So I see this justification a lot. And I also know that a white man is, or even today, we don't have the same white man. The Spanish, the French, the Ukrainians, the Americans, they are all different. But we lump them together, tar them with the same brush, and ask them to accept responsibility. Prof, is it fair that when it comes to us and the role we played, I'm a Ghanaian, I'm Black, and indigenous slaves were sold in Ghana. Why can I not be bold enough to take responsibility and say, my people who were in Ghana did this and it was wrong. But I say, oh, maybe I'm an Asante, I'm a Frafra, a Gomba, and Ewe were different. But when it comes to the white man, we expect them to take responsibility as a unit. Do you think this narrative or narration is fair?
It's not fair, but it's complicated because of the thought pattern. Everybody has a way of thinking, you know. Sometimes it bundles together that, oh, what you've thought of, I've also thought of. But it doesn't always happen that way. Sometimes people have said, but I was not responsible for the war. I did not fight the battle. I did not catch the slave. So why are you telling me to pay reparations for something somebody else did? So it is still going on. It's not that simple. And I say it's not simple. It's a complicated issue. Really, really complicated.
Thank you very much.
But I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know whether we can talk about the issue of forgiveness. That not everything works well in life. So sometimes when it didn't go too well, we just forgive and move on.
Okay, some of our contributors are posting comments, and let me read a few of them. This one is from Emmanuel Hayford. He says, acknowledging this past does not mean shifting blame away from the European powers that orchestrated the transatlantic slave system. Instead, it is a step forward, a step toward understanding the full picture, fostering dialogue and working toward reconciliation between Africans and their descendants in the diaspora. Healing begins with truth and open discussion about history can help bridge the gap and strengthen our shared identity. The challenge today is not just acknowledging history, but working together to address the lasting effects of slavery, such as economic disparities, identity loss, and historical injustices. So we can collectively build a future of unity and empowerment. More importantly, the kind of slavery we practiced was entirely different from what they went through. Zuleika Adamu Awudu says, does Prof think the legacy of indigenous slavery impacted Ghanaian society, particularly in relation to racial, ethnic, or class divisions? Prof, I don't know whether you'd want to respond to this.
I think, it's like a jigsaw puzzle. So many things are going through it, and it's difficult to say the blame game. This is what has happened, so do this. But the idea of reparations is still something which I think we can hold on. And then, of course, people will say, for example, I'll say, I wasn't part of it, so why do I do reparations? But then it can come to quickly understanding that when heads have been done, there's a way of saying compromise and saying, let's pray about the heads done, forgive ourselves, and let's move on in our life. Otherwise, psychologically, you always be angry and upset. That's what I think.
Yes. Mark Appiah says, can there be true forgiveness without admission of guilt?
But the point is that you were not the one who did it. So it's like the guilt is going across the children and grandchildren and so on. Maybe we need some psychologists to help in this discussion and look at what happens when people are treated in a certain way or remember it after years and years and years. Maybe we need some of them, psychologists and psychiatrists and so on, to say, what do we do and how do we move on in life?
Thank you. Kofi Boateng says, he has a very important question, that there are some scholars who say that transatlantic slavery was a raid and not a trade. I understand your work was focused on indigenous slavery, but from what you studied, how often were slave raids compared to trades between natives and the Europeans? In other words, if we Africans didn't take part to capture and sell anybody, and the Europeans were to mainly come with soldiers, fight and conquer people, was it possible for these people to have gone to, let's say, Paga or Hamile in these mosquito-infested lands to get slaves and walk all the way to the coast and take them back? What was the percentage of our participation?
This one it's like having a dream, you know. Both of us, as we talk, we were not part of it. We've heard, we've read. And so the issue of the blame game becomes a bit difficult for me, especially as somebody has researched on slavery for many, 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 many years. So I think that there's an issue of forgiveness, which maybe can help. And maybe we can think of the fact that I wasn't the one who did it. My parents were not the one, my grandparents and so on. But let's forgive and let's move on. Because if you keep getting angry and angry and angry, psychologically, you are not strong enough to do certain things. And then you are not a happy person at all. So I think we should press on and move on to do the best we can, to forgive, to forget, and to move on.
Thank you very much. I think we don't have enough time to take all the questions. We promised an hour.
Right.
The discussion is getting so interesting that I wish we had more time and perhaps had planned to admit more people. But I'm told this discussion will be posted on YouTube, and I think I will share with everybody, and we can keep the discussion going. The last question I would want to ask before Dr. Yaw Perbi come in again.
Vanessa, would you like to maybe ask one person there's some hands have been raised for a while.
Okay. And so yeah. Esther, we have Mercy.
I was the first.
Okay, Mercy.
Good afternoon, Prof. You taught me history in a Bury Girls Secondary School. Great to see you again. This is Mercy Otu. My question.
Hello.
Yeah, great to see you. Once I was in the US in February, and there was one of the big Asante kings, and his explanation to a school that he went to about slavery was that the white man told us that we should bring our best princesses and princes to be trained in the US. So we gave them our best, and then they treated them as slaves. But I was like, didn't we see what was happening in the slave castles? I don't buy that. But for me, what is important is the effect that slavery has had on our mentality. And I agree with Prof that we need psychologists to break down, because I think one of the impact is aid and development. That instead of Africans, I think reparations is something that may be difficult, but what Africans need to stand and demand their own rights is about development and fair trade practices. Because without that, we cannot move forward. And when we are giving pieces of aid and then to kind of our presidents are very happy, it doesn't help us to move forward in development. No nation can really develop if it's not using trade as a lever to move forward. And I think we need to look at what happened during the slave trade. I think something happened that affected our mind, because I've been to other countries in other parts of the world, and it seems there's something about us Africans that somehow made us susceptible more to the slave trade. We need to address that, number one. Now, we need to look at what lessons we have learned to ensure that when we negotiate with our trade partners, we do it on an equal footing. Thank you.
Well spoken, well spoken.
I think the network, yeah. Thank you very much. This is a very important point. I was reading a research that showed that places that slaves were raided even suffered or still suffer from some level of poverty, and their level of trust has gone down. So people whose ancestors were raided don't easily trust. And so there's a very serious psychological thing still happening here. I'll take briefly, let's just limit our comments to just 1 minute so that we can close early. Esther, can you please let us hear you? Esther Lambert.
Hi, good morning. Thank you so much, Professor Perbi, for your wonderful presentation. You mentioned forgiveness, which I think is very important. But how do we forgive people who have not really asked for forgiveness?
Well, we'll still have to think about it. We still have to think about it. It's a complicated issue.
Right.
Thank you. Nana Robe, just the last one, just be brief so that we end the question section.
Yeah.
And I'll ask my last question and we leave.
Absolutely. I'll try to be brief. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, we can.
Yes. Okay. So I'm a PhD student at Penn State and in comparative literature, and this is my research: slavery and silence and the trauma, but for affected communities. And actually speaking, especially when it comes to African complicity in slavery, I would ask us to look beyond the binary of victims and culprits, where victims are Africans that sold and Africans that were sold and culprits are Native Africans that sold, because the Africans that partook in the slaving and raiding do not outnumber what Kojopo Ajiman would call the victim society. That means Africans were victims of the capture, right? So for every one African slaver, there are hundreds of Africans that dealt with the loss of the people, of their family members that were taken away, right? And so the conversation should be had in tandem or in conversation with resistance as well. Because even when you go to the Elmina slave castle, there's also a canoe that heads inwards to kill people that will come in and save their own people. So let's have the conversation around resistance and as much as complicity. But I wanted to ask Professor Perbi that a lot of scholarships have asserted that historians, especially after independence, focused on more Pan-African narratives and didn't so much focus on slavery, especially the transatlantic slave trade or domestic slave trade, in order to have a more Pan-African identity, especially for Ghana. And I would like to know what your thoughts are on that.
Well, I haven't looked at that area, we are talking about a very big topic, and it's not everything that all of us can understand at the same time. So I'm glad you said this. It will set me thinking. I have to start thinking.
Thank you very much. My last question to you, Prof, is, will you be surprised that our great-grandchildren will one day be learning or reading history books that would point to bare lands that used to be forest reserves and blame the Chinese for coming to Ghana and destroying our forest and asking for reparations from the Chinese? Will you be surprised?
I surely won't be, because you don't do that on somebody else's land. Just come around and dig and sell. So we all have to think of that as well.
And of course, there will be this debate again about whose fault was it. Thankfully, we have lived through this period, and we know that no Chinese would have done this without the complicity of our chiefs, our politicians, and individuals who are greedy enough to sell our minerals, our soils, our waters, and destroy everything for their personal gain. And for me, this is the lesson that I take from this. Thank you so much, Prof. Perbi, for sharing this wonderful moment with us. It is unfortunate that we don't have much time. And I hope we may need to do this some other time because many people are interested. And thank you, Dr. Perbi, our Perbi, for putting this together. It has been enlightening. And I think that sessions like this shouldn't just end. We should be challenged to study more.
Right.
And more importantly, tell ourselves that if our forefathers and foremothers sold our own people and caused them this great pain, we should do better and not sell our forests and lands and resources to the Chinese and whoever has a little money to throw at us. Thank you so much to everybody, and happy Ghana month.
Thank you so much, Prof.
Wonderful.
and Manasseh and Dr. Perbi. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Mercy. Thank you, all of you. And for those of you who want to study more, like Manasseh mentioned, the book is online. You can get it on Amazon. If you are in Ghana, you can get it from Kingdom Books, University Bookshop, etc. There's a profile, of course, of Professor Perbi, a much younger looking picture there, and the young shall grow. And of course, you know,
the young shall grow.
The young shall grow, yes, a bit about the book itself. It's a fascinating subject. And Manasseh, like you were saying, I think we probably should organize a part 2 at some point about the implications, just the implications. For today, most of us have actually gotten to know and realize two slaveries. And I remember when my mom came up with this finding, there were people who really hated her for it, because there are some people who only want to hang this on the white man. And certainly the white man is complicit in this, but we have a part that we have played. And so thank you all for being part of this. And like you know, the African proverb, until the lion learns how to write, every tale of the hunt will always glorify the hunter. It is time that we told our stories, we documented our stories, and shared those stories. I'd like to thank Perbi Paradise for putting this together. I want to thank Africa to the Rest as well, and thank the Africa Center for Mission Mobilization and Research and the Pan-African International Students Movement. And of course, a big thank you to Professor Perbi for making yourself available. I think we need to pull you out more. We need to yes, we need to get all we can from you, and especially the Gen Z. We need to know our history so we know where we're heading. And thank you, Manasseh, for doing this, especially as this really was a ground what do you call it? Grassroots thing. You know, people on Facebook and LinkedIn said, yeah, we need to have conversations. And there are more conversations to come about independence, about how we treat each other in Ghana today, you know, about how we behave as politicians. You know, who said here and things like that. There are things in us that are coming from deep that we need to talk about. My mom has some work on the legacies of slave trade. So there are some court cases in our books that bring out the issue of slavery, because somebody's trying to claim a property and then people say, hey, we'll show you where you came from. You know, so the implications are huge, even now. And I hope we can get that conversation maybe next month, maybe next quarter, maybe next year, I don't know. But God willing, we'll do something sooner than later. Thank you all so much for being with us. Manasseh, God bless you immensely. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
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 Bye. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Akbelo, akbekakaka.
Bye, God bless. We'll put the recording on YouTube so you can
Goodbye.
refer.
Thank you.
Mommy, dad, thank
Mommy,
you.
dad. Mommy, dad, to do a